China's South Asian policy, triggers and dilemmas. My gratitude to the European Foundation for South Asian Studies and the Labour Foreign Policy Group for this invitation. The current think of His Majesty's government, in underscoring our Indo-Pacific tilt, has inferred that the People's Republic of China constitutes a clear and present danger to the core interests, national and international, of the United Kingdom. This has been adequately attested in two public speeches by successive SIS chiefs and our Director General of GCHQ. I refer here to Sir Alex Younger, December 2018, and Sir Richard Moore, July 2023. The latter, 4 months ago in Prague, remarked, quote, "We now devote more resources to China than anywhere else, reflecting China's increasing global significance. We have watched China steadily expand its influence in contested spaces by offering countries ambitious deals that look too good to be true, and frequently turn out to be exactly that," close quote. Which brings me to the theme and focus of our seminar, the Indian subcontinent, a region whose future implications hold ramifications for the United Kingdom's foreign policy, in consonance with our new East of Suez engagement with the successor states of British India and the environs. My observations as a historian are not intended to be exhaustive, but suggestive for further study and the consideration of policy planners at the FCDO, House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committees, and relevant all-party parliamentary groups. The PRC, People's Republic of China, in extant scholarship, is regarded in South Asia as a, quote, offshore balancer. A geostrategic assessment of Sino-South Asian relations is generally refracted through the prism of Sino-Indian militaries and the adversarial relationship. By this is implied the perennial Indian anxiety of Chinese intentions and objectives in the subcontinent, but also Western Indian Ocean region, which, as you know, is deemed part of the greater Indo-Pacific security sphere. India's regional primacy, traditionally a given, is not so obvious anymore, and Chinese attempts to challenge Indian hegemony in its sphere of influence is evident as smaller states of the region, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives and Bangladesh, have, in their respective maneuverings, been able to leverage this rivalry to reap tangible benefits from a rising power, China. It is a fallacy to presume that only big states call the shots in international relations. What could be more illustrative than the Cold War era, where African, Middle Eastern and Central American states played off both superpowers to maximize their geostrategic objectives and economic development. India is no longer the principal trading partner of Nepal, Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. All three plus Pakistan have sought to offset Indian dominance and control by pursuing strategies that are, for the most part, bilaterally beneficial. All of them do tangibly gain by playing the China offshore balancer card. It would be rash to conclude they are merely exploited by China. India's sheer presence through its geographic and demographic size, military and economic assets, and historic impress in all these states is being not just challenged but also eroded. Bangladesh did just that when it initiated the founding of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, at a foreign ministers' maiden meeting in 1983, ostensibly in view of the USSR's invasion of Afghanistan as a regional security challenge to all states, but actually to contain an overbearing India in the region. Dhaka was also instrumental in having Beijing included at SAARC with observer status 2005. So India went one better by also proposing the inclusion of Washington, Tokyo, Canberra and Seoul as observer status members to even out the field. Much water has flowed under the bridge since Mao's China vetoed Bangladesh's entry to the UN in 1974. It did join late that year, despite being an independent, de facto de jure sovereign state since December 1971. And diplomatic relations were only established in January 1976, 5 months on after its revolutionary leader, Mujibur Rahman, was assassinated. The era following Mujib's slaying saw the end of the high point of Indo-Bangladesh relations. A subsequent cooling with New Delhi also ushered a warming with Beijing. Today, China supplies 82% of Bangladesh's armaments. Chinese deals do not come with qualifiers demanding political transparency or human rights accountability, whether in Bangladesh, Pakistan or Sri Lanka. Beijing may be better known now for appropriating the Sri Lankan port of Hambantota and the unraveling of the Sri Lankan economy in the post-COVID era. It may be recalled that weapons provided to Colombo did help it finally acquire an edge over those LTTE Tamil secessionists to obliterate them in 2009. Following that, China sharply checked any moves led by the US and the international community, calling for an inquiry into abuses against the minority Tamil populace by the Sinhala-dominated military. In shutting down any such commission sponsored by Washington at the Human Rights Council, New Delhi was in a dilemma, for it was in favour of voting for just such an investigation, but then settled for an abstention vote to not push Colombo further into Beijing's embrace and concomitantly not be seen an antagonistic partisan merely animated by the claims of an aggrieved Tamil Indian minority. We need not detain ourselves here pointing out India's complicated involvement in the ethnic civil war that led to its army's humiliating exit after an ill-judged peacekeeping initiative, followed by the assassination of one former Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi. Incidentally, his grandfather Nehru got no support during the Sino-Indian War of 1962 when Colombo refrained from condemning China as aggressor. Pakistan made capital out of that 1962 border clash when some months after the war, it signed a Sino-Pakistan boundary frontier agreement in March 1963. India's reaction to the parceling of already disputed territory, 5,200 kilometers, from the erstwhile Kingdom of Kashmir, the source of contention, and the first Indo-Pakistan War, 2 months on from partition, was predictably furious. China, it needs to be noted, is the third party, rather fifth wheel to the Kashmir imbroglio over the last 7 decades. India's objections to the Belt and Road investment, publicly first expressed in 2017, was predicated on primarily that violation of international sovereignty as projects were conceived in disputed territory, but also doubts over financial viability and project sustainability. Beijing, however, is not driven to provoking India continuously. It never opened a third front during the Third Indo-Pakistan War of 1971 to relieve Pakistan fighting India on its eastern and western fronts. It has come around to viewing Kashmir as a bilateral issue and does not share Pakistan's zeal now to internationalize the crisis as it did in the 60s and 70s. It does, however, throw up irritants to India by stapling visas of Kashmir-domiciled Indian passport bearers to separate pages. India has not, as China would imagine, play up the Tibet issue reciprocally. From Mao's days, there lingered the perception that New Delhi manipulates Tibetan refugees as secessionists who can be activated anytime with American assistance to threaten China's western outlier region. India has done nothing of the sort. Tibetan protests were controlled during the Summer Olympics of 2008. Hong Kong's democracy protesters turning up at the consulate of the world's largest democracy to seek moral support by handing over petitions have been rebuffed under strict instructions from the Indian Foreign Office. And likewise, the other problematic minority in China's periphery, the Sunni Uyghurs of Xinjiang. India plays mum here too. A tacitly acknowledged cold peace exists between both rivals, careful to let simmering tensions simmer, not boil over. China cannot permanently alienate India, even though New Delhi perceives incremental strategic encirclement pursued by sea, those strings of pearls such as Chittagong, Gwadar and Hambantota, where Chinese submarines have berthed on goodwill visits, or land, namely the Tibetan Plateau, and potential water wars, since the third pole, or Asia's water tower, the Yalung Sang pole, could be diversified, leading to havoc across India, but also Bangladesh and Pakistan. Both the Indus and Brahmaputra originate in Tibet, and China has no water treaties in place with either Bangladesh or India. A proposed extension of the Shigatse rail line to Kathmandu also makes New Delhi jittery. But ladies and gentlemen, I have used this example to demonstrate how small states can dictate terms. Nepal is unable to secure funding and is only willing to give the go-ahead if China builds it under a grant arrangement. Xi Jinping's unease is natural, what with the slowdown in the Chinese economy, and lest it sets a precedent for other BRI projects. And although China has squabbled over frontier posts with the former Hindu kingdom turned Maoist republic, relations have remarkably been not just stable but flourishing. Here too, China is concerned about the presence of a huge population of Tibetan refugees. And while the Maoists in Kathmandu are not clones of Beijing per se, it is striking that radical peasant republicanism took root in Nepal during the early 90s as China, under Deng Xiaoping, turbocharged its way to becoming an authoritarian, capitalist, all-in-but-name regime. It is the Uyghur headache for China that makes it leery of Pakistan for all the bombast of a, quote, all-weather friendship touted as sweeter than honey and deeper than the ocean. PIA was the first non-communist airline to fly to Beijing in 1964, despite massive protests lodged by the State Department against Field Marshal Ayub Khan, then a staunch Cold War client and member of CENTO and SEATO pacts. Pakistan continued to play up its time-honored strategic non-NATO ally relationship, even after the Cold War ended, as we know, during the War on Terror. It remains, like Qatar, another ally and a very questionable one. And it was, after all, Foreign Secretary Cameron, as Prime Minister in 2010, who was the first Western leader to publicly declare, some 9 years on after 9/11, that Pakistan, quote, looks both ways. And now, Islamabad looks east, smugly confident that the China-Pakistan economic corridor is the best thing to happen since 1947. That $62 billion project is the showpiece of China's BRI. But China knows it can manipulate Pakistan, indeed has, for Uyghur militants in the past found a beachhead, as did so many other jihadists in Pakistan. And it depends on Islamabad not to have Chinese workers and teachers shot dead in Balochistan in the northwest frontier, or its Karachi consulate attacked by suicide bombers. China knows it needs Pakistan to prevail upon the Taliban, containing any militancy spilling over into heavily securitized and monitored Xinjiang. With Afghanistan, China shares a 92-kilometer-long border, in fact the shortest among all the states of South Asia. And it was an ominous editorial in the People's Daily, Renmin Rinbao 2005, which opined Pakistan, quote, will exert a very important influence on maintaining the stability and regional safety in the northwestern borderland of China, close quote. Pakistan derives not little comfort in its relevance as both fire starter and poser, a nightmare for not just the UK and its western partners, but also China. And of the 14 countries with which it shares a land boundary, its demarcations with India and Bhutan, both in South Asia, remain unresolved. The People's Republic has otherwise settled disputes with its other 12 neighbours. Disputing with India is one thing, a regional nation rival with near similar ambitions as a rising civilizational power. When sparring with tiny landlocked Bhutan, China knows it comes across globally as no different than an aggressive regional imperialist, if not outright bully. And that's not a good look.